scheme does. So we start from the point when we're looking at radio equipment, EMC, safety, radio spectrum protection. From a safety perspective, it's covered up in these, an EMC in these various regulations. So this is the have to do for our local market, and we've covered that quite a lot today. If we look at, I'll skip through that. Once we go beyond our local market into the rest of the world, global market access, Steve was just talking about, there's all these different requirements. They're not the same as us. So CE exists within, to all intents and purposes, the UK and the 27 member states of the EU, plus other EEA members. Outside of that, all these different regulatory regimes exist. Some recognition that you can carry across, like Australia. Others, quite different with different mandatory requirements. So whereas we can use CE, Manufacturer's Declaration, for Europe and the UK, when you begin to go further afield, quite often it's third-party requirements, or they're looking for some form of specific recognition. And we've had since 1985 the CB scheme, which originally set out for safety of electrotechnical equipment and components to harmonize global trade. And this is building on the back of the fact that most safety standards published by the IEC, also used by ENs, are globally harmonized. So for IT equipment, IEC 62368-1 is EN IEC 62368-1 is UL 62368-1 for America. So it carries across the globe. So the whole purpose of this scheme was trying to make it simpler for manufacturers to test once, get a certificate, and then be able to use it anywhere else in the world. So CB certificates promote this and help you gain approval at national level. So if you want to sell a product into Argentina with a specific level of mandatory requirement, having a CB certificate can get you, if not all the way, but most of the way to satisfying whatever's covered by that CB certificate. Because you can do something where you test to the IEC standard, and then they have supplementary reports of national differences that then look at the differences for Argentina, the differences for the EU, the differences for the US. So a CB report and certificate can really give you global coverage. When we compare what CB scheme does with CE marking and UKCA, the difference is there. Whereas CE is must be safe when supplied or sold, it's a manufacturer's documentation to support claims, and it's self-declared largely. For the CB scheme, you must comply with IEC standards in full. So a CB certificate means all the relevant tests have been applied. There's no element of judgment in it. You start at clause 1, you end at clause 30, and you cover everything in between. All the reports are third party, so it gives you confidence that not just the manufacturer think it's safe, but a third party test lab also agrees with them and is willing to put their name to it. And then there's a simplified set of certificates to help you demonstrate that. So effectively, if you comply with the IECE certificate, and you get the European deviations for it, you will meet the technical requirements for CE and UKCA. So if you imagine that in a European context, you can do the same thing for North America, for parts of Asia, South America, Africa, etc. And then you use a CB certificate to present to the local regulatory body to get your local badge. And Steve covered some of those badges earlier on. But it's a big scheme. But most people don't realize that it's 120,000 certificates a year. This thing's been going for 40 years. There's 3 million certificates CB certificates out there. So we issued 120,000 certificates in 2023. I say we, I mentioned it, I'm the chair of the IECE this year. So in addition to having been as an NCB for many years, I have the privilege to lead the organization for the next 3 years. So 120,000 certificates in a year. You can see the breakdown of those, but if we just take the top 3, which is ITAV, information technology, radio equipment, household equipment, and batteries, account for 72% of all CB certificates issued in 2023, which is a huge block of that. Now, following down from that, there's office equipment, lighting, EMC, medical, measurement tools, and instrumentation. But in the way in which these certificates are issued, you can see the common areas. ITAV, and battery, particularly for radio products. Now, originally, the CB scheme was all about electrical safety, and I've highlighted those three categories here: battery, ITAV, household. But in this, there's cables, there's capacitors, there's EMC, again, not a safety, instrumentation, lighting, controls, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, measurement, medical, cybersecurity, and photovoltaics, amongst others. If we go and grab two of those, cybersecurity and EMC, these are new categories within the IECE, recognizing that those products, those information technology, household products, medical products, measurement equipment, have connections to the internet these days. Cybersecurity now becomes part of the criteria that if you were just coming to the CB scheme for electrical safety, you're likely to want to secure your cybersecurity as well. So early days, but they're beginning to develop cybersecurity standards so that you can demonstrate cybersecurity to your customers on a global scale. Part of the problem with that at the moment is there is no global standard for cybersecurity. The UK in April issued the PSTIR, our cybersecurity regulations. In 2026, I think the EU will issue their regulations. The Americans are about to issue their regulations. So we're in severe danger of going back to where we were 30 years ago, where you're going to have to go to every single country to meet their cyber requirements. And what the CB scheme is doing now is trying to look and see how we can contribute to a harmonization of that. So it'll be the same as getting your electrical safety sorted, one place, and then you can go and use that base report anywhere else in the world. The second category of interest, particularly as talking today, is the radio aspects of EMC. Historically, EMC has been mostly medical EMC, with some key EMC standards under the CB scheme. But recently, we've adapted that to bring in some radio standards, particularly radio modules in electrical equipment. For the same reason as cybersecurity is important, if you're making electrical control panels and you want to put a wireless device in it, now the same customer has got a need for radio compliance in that as well. So the CB scheme is adapting into these new areas to try and give that same level of global confidence that it's provided for many years in safety. IECE member bodies, there are 53 member bodies in the CB scheme. And if you look to your left, it encompasses all of the G20 countries. So all the major economies of the world are represented in the CB scheme. These member bodies are supported by 93 certification bodies. There are 4 in the United Kingdom that support that. 550 test laboratories, of which Element has one of those in the UK and one of those in the United States. A huge number of testing laboratories. It represents, or it serves, 15,000 manufacturers, 2,000 of which have testing done on their own premises as part of the scheme. And these are all the major manufacturers serving all of the major economies. And that's why it's really important that the scheme adapts to things like modular radio and cybersecurity in order to continue to provide a service into those markets. How does it work? Well, in theory, you go to a test lab and with a CB, NCB attached, certification body attached. They arrange to have the product tested to particular standards, so it goes to the CBTL, a testing laboratory. They test it, produce a report, pass it back to the NCB, who issues a CB test certificate, goes back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer can then go to country X, Argentina, approach the Argentinian NCB, one of those 93 bodies in the 53 countries, who will then grant the national mark without conducting any retesting. You can then go to another country, go to the US, do the same thing again, get their national mark using the same test report and certificate. And in some cases, you can use for direct acceptance into the region. So a CB certificate with national deviations for the EU will satisfy those technical requirements for direct access into the European and UK markets. And there's quite a few places in the world where that direct acceptance route is available to you, which means anybody who goes and gets a CB report and certificate even if they don't go for national marks, gets a good number of markets they can access by virtue of that system. And there's a database, and in the database, there's a publicly accessible sort of certificate summary, which is searchable by regulators and certification bodies who can see that you have a valid certificate, who issued it, what does it cover, etc. And this is being looked at for revision to see whether we can expand on the detail in that. Why is this important? Well, in 2022, this is the data for 2022, the top 10 recognizing countries. So this is not direct market access. This is where you have a regulator in a country who needs some sort of evidence of testing for safety or for EMC to enable you to sell in that country. In 2022, we issued roughly 120,000 CB certificates, as we did before, as an organization. And these are the countries that accepted them. You won't be able to see them, the numbers are too small, but it's Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, China, Israel, 2 lots of Koreas, forget what the other one, Serbia, as it is the odd one I can't remember, Malaysia, another Korea, and then UL Solutions for the US. These are major markets, 37,000 certificates, and nearly a third of all those CB certificates were providing manufacturers with access to highly regulated markets. By default, doing a calculation, 83,000 CB certificates were used to go into less regulated markets. So it's a widely used scheme, widely recognized and effective for manufacturers going into these marketplaces. So why is the CB scheme so recognized? Well, stakeholders, it's a broad base from global manufacturing, from regulators and conformity assessment. I said earlier on, we have the DBT, UK government, on our UK committee. And that involvement is in every one of those 53 member states to help us understand what the regulatory framework is and then share that with other countries to help facilitate that trade. It's consensus-driven based on IEC principles and using IEC standards, which is great. If you can harmonize those standards, then 99% of the work is done for you meeting the IEC, and you're just meeting national differences like funny UK plugs. And lastly, it's very well respected. The CB scheme uses or recognizes UCAS accreditation only insofar as it's evidence that you meet ISO 17025 or ISO 17065 as a baseline. But you don't get away with that. To be a member, a CB or a test lab in this system, you have to be subject to peer assessment once every 3 years. What that means is once every 3 years, 2 or 3 senior engineers from your competitors, one of those other 550 bodies in the CB scheme, come into your organization and validate that you are suitable to be in that scheme. So it's incredible. We let our competitors in to judge us, and then they sign us off to say that we're good enough to be in that club of 93 certification bodies. Really, really important differentiator, because the people who are coming into the Element labs are people who run labs elsewhere in the world, and with the greatest respect to UCAS, these guys really know what they're doing because they live it every single day. They're not assessors, they are test engineers, laboratory managers. So they come and make sure that we're all doing it properly, which is really valuable. And it's based upon an acceptance of where UCAS have started off. So UCAS has its value here, but peer assessment is something quite special for this scheme, and it gives it extra value, which is why it has such wide global recognition. And it gives advantage to regulators. Because it's IEC standards, it helps establish a trustworthy threshold of safe and quality products coming into their market. So if you are a developing market, perhaps in Africa or in Asia or in South America, you can rely on the CB scheme as evidence that the product has actually been tested to a standard and complies with it. Whether that involves giving you a Kenyan national mark or a South African national mark or what have you is irrelevant to it. It allows the regulator to check that the certificate they're being presented with is actually valid. And it encourages domestic industry in those countries to benchmark against international practice, so you don't end up with countries producing subpar, substandard product in competition to your wonderfully compliant IEC and EN standard version. So it's about raising the standards for everybody and opening this up and facilitate free trade. So regulators benefit from the popularity of this scheme and being in the CB scheme, and we're seeing more regulators engaging directly in the CB scheme. So we now have a class of body called another recognizing body, who isn't a certification body. They are a regulator that wants to use CB certificates and wants to use the scheme to help people to access their markets safely, or for EMC compliance, for cybersecurity, and going forward into radio. For manufacturers, it has obvious advantages. Recognition in the major G20 economies, greater market acceptance than CE and UKCA because it's full compliance. Your product is third-party certified, whereas it might be self-declared. It meets the full requirements of the standard, not just the bits that your competitors may have picked up. There's mutual recognition in key markets. All of those 53 member bodies are agreeing to accept each other's work, so there's an eased path, there's a well-trodden path to getting acceptance of your products into those markets fairly quickly. And then in great numbers of markets, you can get direct acceptance by regulators or straight to buyers, distributors in those marketplaces. And then I think probably one of the most important things is expanded markets. If you are selling into Europe and you have a CB certificate with CB test report, you meet the requirements for our domestic and near neighbor market. If then someone says, right, I want to sell in Argentina, or I want to sell in Uruguay, or I want to sell in Kenya or Nigeria, you can come along and say, right, can you just do me the national differences for that country, which might be tiny, and then you've got a very quick upgrade. Most of those differences will require no testing. It'll be changed to manuals, changed to markings. And suddenly, you've got a certificate that you can use to leverage into that marketplace. By having the base CB certificate and CB test report, you don't have to choose what those markets are in advance. You can wait until you need it. So you might decide, I want European deviations, I want the US and Canada, big markets, and then the others you'll wait and get done as and when you need it. So there's a huge advantage of that when you want to build your market presence, even if you don't know where you want to go. If you already know, I want to go to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Australia, Argentina, United States, Canada, you can have all those national differences done at once and then go straight out into those markets and begin picking up those flags of the world and those markets that you want to sell your product into. So the CB scheme helps us take conformity assessment a little further, perhaps, than what we've been talking about today when we're talking about CE and UKCA. It gives you that passport for free trade that you often hear about, but it does actually work. And you can see it works because 120,000 products were certified last year for that, and 37,000 were used for direct access. It answers the market need for product certification using globally harmonized standards. So there's a push on cybersecurity to have the IEC publish cybersecurity standards so that individual countries or regions stop inventing their own rules. Because where there's a void, where there is no cybersecurity standard, someone's going to fill the void. Now, in a couple of years' time, the EU is going to publish its own set of 18,000 series standards. But the US will be doing something else. Asia will be doing something else. So there's a push from the CB scheme with its standards counterpart to try and get some harmonized standards to bring us back to that one-stop shop. And it simplifies certification or approval at national level. Go through this route for CB, you're doing it full compliance to the standard, not missing anything out, no risk, and at the end of the day, you've met your CE, UKCA requirements as well. So you automatically get your technical requirements for your local market covered by applying this route. So if you don't use this for market access, perhaps because you think it's only safety, perhaps because you think it's only for washing machines or hairdryers, it does cover all the radio products, even battery-powered ones. It covers the batteries that go into many of these IoT products as well. It's covering cybersecurity, it's covering radio, and it's going to expand in more of those areas as the scheme tries to adapt to continue serving that marketplace and increasing the number of certificates that are circulating in the scheme. So that's all I've got to say on CB. As Steve said, I'll answer some questions probably when we're having coffee. But I mentioned this at the start, and I'm going to finish on it as well. It's on the wall out there, right at the top of that thing, making tomorrow safer than today. We help our customers make certain that their products, materials, processes, and services are safe, compliant, and fit for purpose. It's a really, really strong statement. My bosses have gone now. But we all have marketing departments who produce us lovely slogans that they change from time to time. But this actually, truly, I might have that on my tombstone. It really is something to live by. And an element as an organization does try to live by that. We do our very, very best to do that for you. And I know you do that when you're designing your products for market. So I'll leave you with making tomorrow safer than today. Steve, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon, and thank you for bearing with us. I know there's a tough shift to get through there, so thank you for sticking with it. As Simon just said, that is the end of our technical presentations. If you've got any questions or comments or anything like that, we're all going to be around here afterwards, and feel free to hang around and collar whoever to ask those questions. If you're done and you want to go, then please, obviously, Lou's facilities are on the way out, and then if you go via reception, we'll take the name badges back off you to make sure that you're signed out, and there's a little goodie there to collect on your way out as well. So thank you again, everybody, for turning up, and thanks for sharing our day with us. Oh, sorry, question. Yes, all the slides will be available. I'm not entirely sure the mechanism getting them to you, but we've got your email address. I think normally it's a link to a site where they'll be located. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much.